Double 2-in-1 weekend. Aren't you so lucky? What's this one going to be about? Well, this one is going to be about, it's an extension of, I think, a previous video or two, where I was talking about that new job I was going for, and then eventually got it, and then I was going to tell you, what was the defining factor that really meant that I became the preferred candidate and the person that eventually, succeeded in getting the role. Now, it is one of the most core skills that you will ever learn, and it can do nothing but help you in life throughout, I'd say, every component of literally every moment of your life, every interaction, everything you do. And so, you'll want to be working on this, and you'll be wanting to get it as, good as possible. And that is your communication skills, incredibly important. And that was the defining feature. The feedback I got from the panel was that because I had to do a presentation in the interview and then answer a bunch of questions. And my presentation was so good. That isn't really a great descriptor, isn't it? So good. It was clear, I was confident, it was informative, it ticked all the boxes it needed to, and the best thing was apparently it seemed completely at ease. There was no nervousness or hint of uncertainty in how I was presenting and how I answered those questions that they then had after. And that's come along from a long process and period of me working on my communication skills and interview skills as well, because I feel like that's a subset of the communication skills at large. Now, God, that was dead air. Now, what I want to talk about or say is okay, so what can we do to improve our communication skills? Because someone might be thinking, okay, improve my communication skills. How do I do that? One of them, oddly enough, is reading. And I think one of the best things to do in regards to communication is going to a book by Daniel Goleman called Emotional Intelligence. Now, pretty much anything Daniel Goleman does is pretty much brilliant. He's released many books about social intelligence and just all sorts of things around that. But I think that's the best starting point, especially if you're not someone who has to do many presentations or doesn't have to do many speaking engagements, because I feel like those are probably, as you can imagine, probably the best ways to work on your communication skills. But that doesn't mean you can't do it, on the small time, even if you aren't doing those things. But I feel like if you were starting from scratch, reading that book would be a really good start, because it gives you the basic, I think, framework of, your interactions with other people and the underlying emotions that can motivate or influence those things. And I think having at least an understanding of that will give you the foundation to then be, working on your communication skills as a wider whole. And I think another thing is just reading in general. Just reading in general. And it can be, God, I don't really want to say this, but it can be fiction if you want. But ideally, I think you should be reading non-fiction. But that's just me. And the reason why I think reading is so important for your communication skills is it expands your vocabulary, which the better understanding you have of language and how to communicate, God, isn't it because you got to think about the communication as almost like a meal, right? And a social interaction is kind of like a meal when it comes to communicating. And the words that you use are one of the ingredients that you use. Now, the richer, the more, and it's like the spice. I think that's a better way to put it. It's like the spices that you put into the meal. Whereas, don't get me wrong, body posture and your tonality and things like that obviously have impacts. and like on the whole thing. But I think words are one of those spices that can really add and excel your ability to communicate, because if you can only talk in very basic language, like you can only really communicate very basic concepts to people, which, don't get me wrong, is a very important skill. Like to be able to simplify things is actually a really important skill, like later on, especially when you're dealing with complex bits of information that you have to communicate to maybe a audience that isn't technically trained or isn't trained in that field. So you have to be able to explain things that an everyday person off the street can understand. And I think that's always a good exercise too, but I'll get to that in a second. But the more complicated words that you can, use, I'm not saying you have to load your questions, the more complicated words and, sophisticated words you can use, it's better. It is better because it adds more nuance to what you're trying to communicate. Having said that, it's not, adding a bit of spice to something or a little bit of spice to something is good, right? But overloading it, just, it becomes too much and it becomes, the meal is kind of ruined. So when I'm saying use sophisticated language, I'm not saying you just talk in some old English style, tone of voice and using that kind of language. No, it's more about accenting your normal speech patterns and, turns of phrases with that little touch of something a little bit more and a little bit extra, and that's what will differentiate you. So, when you're talking about someone who's angry, that's one way you could, phrase it, or you could use the word, acrimonious, which, God, probably not the best example. It sounds really, really up yourself if you say acrimonious, but you know what I mean. It can, or you could say that they're peeved or whatever. You have a different roster of words that you can use, because if you just say that, they were angry or this person was angry, you're kind of painting a broad stroke. And if you're using that in a lot of different circumstances, it kind of, ruins the meaning of what that word means, because it applies to too many situations for it to really have a set definition. Whereas when you read more and more, your vocabulary will expand, and then that means in different situations you'll be able to correctly identify the right word that better explains the situation to the audience you're trying to to the audience you're talking to and communicating with. And the better that you can do that, the better you can essentially project what happened, or project what you were trying to say, or what information you're trying to get across to the person. The better you can do that, the more you'll stand out, because it is a difficult skill and not many people practice it. And going back to what I was saying with the previous video about social media, thanks to that, social media has ruined the way in which people communicate, and it's made it much harder for a lot of people to communicate in the real world environment, because they're so used to the communication norms within that virtual world, that doing it in the real world, and being able to do it at a high level is just not as easy. So that's another reason why to get rid of social media. But it's also to explain that a lot of people are handicapping themselves in that regard, where if you don't do that and instead you kind of focus on building up this skill, you will go further in life, and and you will not just career wise, but just with your friendships and with your relationships with your family and friends and just general people that you just come across with your life. You know what I mean? You'll get a richer experience out of it, because you'll be able to identify what they're trying to get across a lot easier, and also you'll be able to explain yourself a lot easier. And understanding between people is the foundation for any sort of social arrangement. There needs to be mutual understanding between people for them to come together in a trusting and charitable kind of way. So reading is one kind of way you can do it. Another way you can kind of work on your communication skills is teaching people things. that is one and it kind of does link up into reading, and this is where I think reading nonfiction is a lot better, because you can learn, and this, trying to talk about like complex concepts and then trying to teach someone that when they don't know, they don't have like an extensive history or, extensive history in that field or in that topic, that is an incredibly great way to not only, relearn what you had learnt yourself, to encourage that so you kind of retain the information, but also it improves your communication skills, because if you can take a complex topic or bit of information maybe that you've learnt in something you're studying or something you're interested in, whatever it necessarily be, it could be history, it could be, astrophysics, doesn't matter. If you can take a concept and try to explain it to someone, one of your friends who isn't, involved in that space, and you can get it to the point that they can understand it and they can go, oh, yeah, okay, I kind of get that now. That is a very good exercise and way to improve your communication skills, because, as I said earlier, being able to... there's kind of like a Venn diagram of like, to succeed in a lot of ways, you need to have like the subject matter expert understanding, you need to have the communication skills, and then the last one, I don't have that many hands, but maybe, I'm not really doing a good Venn diagram with my fingers, but don't worry. The third circle is the technical skills. So you need to have the knowledge side of things, like the underlying theoretical knowledge, and and on a topic, the history of it, where the newest developments are, the underlying principles, things like that. Then you need to have the technical ability, and usually in a lot of instances, especially with the work I do, you need to have the statistical ability and knowledge and programming skills to be able to do what I do for my job. And then the last one is the communication skills, is being able to, hey, you've got the subject matter expert knowledge, you've got the technical ability to apply that knowledge. Now can you communicate it? Like, now can you go to someone who has none of that and explain that to them and get them to understand it? Because that is pretty much what people are, like, that is pretty much what people in business and in government and politics, pretty much in anything really, in any major endeavor, are trying to do. They're trying to take their subject matter knowledge, their technical ability, and then put those two together to be able to, and then to communicate that stuff through their communication skills. So if you can do that, you can really go far in life, because you'll just be leagues ahead of everyone else, because a lot of people tend to focus on one of two things, but I think you need to be able to kind of bring all three together. And of course each one's going to be at varying different levels, but the communication one is, I think, the one people struggle with the most. Like, people can spend enough time getting the subject matter expert because it doesn't really require anything from anyone else. You can do it on your own time. Same thing with the technical ability. But the hard part about the communication thing is to be able to communicate, you need to have someone else there. So I feel like that's always the thing people stumble on the most. They're all incredibly important, but I think that's the one people stumble on the most, because it requires an additional party to be present for you to be able to do it. And it relies on you being able to actually communicate it correctly, which is the other challenge. But yeah, so those are two things, reading, especially reading social intelligence, I think it's social intelligence, or no, it's emotional intelligence, that's it, Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. That's another one you can do. And then, like I said, trying to teach things that you've learnt. And that could just be what I regularly do, is when I'm reading a non-fiction book or whatever, reading about a topic, I always have this friend that I always talk to, and I try to explain. Oops, sorry. Almost died by breathing. Oh, that hurt. And I always trying to explain what I've read, and like I said, it's to help me retain the information, but it's also to work on my communication skills. Now, I think we can do a small little divergence into interview skills. This one has to come through, I believe, like extensive trial and error. And something that really impressed the panel, one of the members of the panel, was that I haven't done an interview for probably at this point 3 years now, because I've been tied up with the Ministry of Health, kind of since then, and that they were just kind of letting me know that like, oh, it's been a couple of years, just be prepared because you haven't done an interview in a really long time. Just just be ready for that, because it's been a long time since you've done something like that. Now, before, like, maybe about 4 years ago, I did like this for like 11 months straight. I was doing like an interview pretty much a week, like maybe 1 or 2 a week for like 11 months trying to find this new role. Oh, it's probably more like 5 years now, but God, how the time flies, right? And so I did countless interviews, and what I found was that we've talked about, I think we've definitely talked about it previously, but situation, action, outcome, every single response in many, like, especially when it's behavioral questions, like, oh, when was there a time that you received feedback from a manager and how did you deal and go about it? Classic, that is one of the most classic questions that you'll get in an interview from someone. You need to develop stories, and this goes back to the communication thing. People love stories. People love stories. They love Disney movies. They love Marvel movies. They love stories. I mean, I know there's Marvel movies probably aren't the best ever, but people like stories. They like it. There's something about it because it tells us. It kind of gives us an understanding of the world. I think that's truly what it in my mind does. Is like it is an explanation of how the world works. And you need to get good at telling stories, especially about yourself. And I know a lot of people struggle talking about themselves, but when you're in an interview, it's all about you in the end of the day. Like, well, I mean, the company, well, some of it's about the job, but like it is about whether you're capable of the job or like whether you're fit for it. And so you need to be able to tell a good story. And that kind of comes from, well, time and practice. And like I said, I think explaining those, like, doing that thing of explaining to your friends complicated topics, I think that's, one way you can kind of work on that as well, because it kind of forces you to structure things in ways that you normally wouldn't. Because when you learn something, like, you kind of learn it the way you do, but when you have to teach someone else, you kind of have to, or like when you're trying to dictate to someone or tell them about something, you kind of have to adapt your communication style or whatever story you're trying to spin to their needs, and you have to be able to act on the fly. And I think with the interviews, that structure, like especially with the interview structure, is situation, action, outcome, which is you outline the situation, then you focus on your actions, and then lastly you move into the outcomes. So what, in that situation, what were your actions and what outcomes came from said actions? I think, God, I mean, that pretty much, that alone will save you. I think that will, in the long term, if you practice that and you just do that time and time and time again, and every time you go to an interview and you stumble across a new question that you've never heard before from the hiring manager, just go home, write that down, and immediately start coming up with situation, action, outcomes. And they only need to be a paragraph or two for each section, just so that you have a basic outline of what you want to say. Because you can't bring a script in, for your interview. But what you can do is you can have a general outline in your mind what you want to say based off those paragraphs, and then in the moment when you're in the interview, you'll be able to kind of like ad-lib it and do it on the fly without having almost kind of God, what's it called? God, what is that word? Oh God, we've been talking about words and now I'm struggling on it. I was going to say impromptu. Good. I can't believe I'm blanking on this. This is embarrassing. God damn it, maybe I'm more tired than I thought today. Oh well, look. I'm trying to mean like on the fly, ad-lib, off the cuff kind of responses. I think you know what I'm trying to say. I can't believe I'm blanking on it, but good. I'm just going to let it go. I'm not going to think about it. Let's focus on this. So yeah, you can kind of off the cuff do it, and you'll be able to with that outline, you'll be able to create a story that fits what they want, like what they want to hear. And figuring out what they want to hear, you'll figure out over time. Just by doing it constantly, you'll just get used to the different kind of vibes that people give off. And then once you know that, that's when you can start, going into what they want, building it to appease them in the interview. And yeah, God, I think I've really been I'm really disappointed in myself that I could not come up with what that word was, and now that's just pissed me off. So now I just want to end the video. And the worst part is I'm probably going to remember it right after I finish this, and you won't even get to know about that, and I'm just going to be sad that you don't know. So I'll type it in the comments section afterwards and just be, happy with that. But I hope that random rambling has made some sort of sense. Just at the end of the day, I'm trying to say that communication skills are really important, and you've got to be able to do that, because if you can do that, 99% of other people won't,